So, first thing is, of course, we're studying the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, the abridged code of Jewish law. So today is the Yahrzeit of the author of the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. So I just thought, being that we study his work the last few years, and just worth mentioning a little bit about him and who he was, when he was, and different things. So just to go back a few steps, just to quickly understand, how do we even get to a Shulchan Aruch? Never mind an abridged one. How does it work? So of course, well, if we really want to go, we can say in the beginning Hashem created the heavens and the earth, but won't go that far back. Okay, so almost 3,500 years ago, Hashem gives us the Torah on Mount Sinai. Now, as well as dictating the 5 books of Moses over the 40 years we're in the wilderness, letter by letter. So some letters are large, some letters are small, some letters are missed out. You know, we have the equivalent of English of do not and don't, and words like that, and how it should be written and various things. Simultaneously, Hashem then gave what we call today the oral Torah, the oral tradition. Now that's on many levels. So there's a famous story of a person wanted to convert, and he comes to the famous Talmudic scholar Shammai, and he says he wants to convert, but on condition that he's only taught the written Torah and not the oral Torah. So Shammai says, well, get out. You can't have one without the other. You're obviously not sincere. You don't really want to know the truth, so goodbye. All right, so the fellow goes to the contemporary of Shammai, goes to Hillel, and he says, can you teach me? I want to convert, but on condition that I study only the written Torah and not the oral Torah. So Hillel felt that this man was sincere. He was just misguided. He was ignorant. So he says, okay, come tomorrow for your first lesson. So he comes tomorrow, and he starts teaching him the Hebrew alphabet, the Aleph base. Says this is Aleph, this is base, this is Gimel, etc., etc. Come back tomorrow for this lesson number 2. Comes back. This time he points to the last letter of the Aleph base. The Sof says this is Aleph. And the second last letter says this is base. He starts, saying it all backwards. And the fellow says, whoa. Yesterday you told me the other way around. How can you, what happened? So he says to him, without our oral, without our Messiah, our oral tradition, oral teaching, we don't even know how to read. Because how do you know this letter is this letter, not that letter? Right? And he showed the fellow that the written Torah comes together with a oral tradition. And, of course, just basic mitzvahs, like the mitzvah mezuzah. The verse says, you shall write them on your doorposts. Now, what's them? And, of course, we don't actually write it on our doorposts. We write it on a parchment, which is affixed to our doorposts, and various things, thousands of laws of how to make a mezuzah. So what happened was, after Hashem dictated the posuk, the sentence, to Moshe, he says he gave him a shear on it, and he taught him this is what it means. And for many years, the average Jew in the street was able to learn the entire oral tradition off by heart. So 2 things changed. Well, in general, we have each generation goes down a little bit, but besides that general descent of generations, there were 2 significant changes. One was the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash, the first temple, and at that point, 10 changes were made to the world. We mentioned it before. The shade of blue of the sky changed slightly, but one of the things that happened was that a certain part of our intellect was locked away. It wasn't removed, but it was hidden. We lost access to it. And that's the reason that prophecy, one of the factors why prophecy stopped. We weren't able to harness the full capacity of our brain. That's change number one. And change number two is that we ended up having tremendous persecution. Sometimes not so much, sometimes more. But the next few hundred years, what ended up happening was people didn't have the peace of mind. They didn't have the infrastructure. Communal infrastructure was destroyed. Yeshivas were destroyed. And so we ended up having to write down the oral Torah in order that it shouldn't be forgotten. Written down many works. So around that time, so the Talmud is probably the most famous, right? So we have the originally the Mishnah was written down, very point form, but that was sufficient for the time. The Midrashim were written down around the time. There's more the details of the stories of in the Torah, and Kabbalistic works. The Zohar, as an example, were all written down in this time period. Until now, all of these works had been passed over orally. With each person or yeshivas have their own little notes. People took notes and they had their notes that they studied from, but it wasn't an official version. It was just your private notes. The Mishnah, what changed was it became the official version of the oral Torah. And then over the next few hundred years, the Gemara developed. The Gemara is essentially the transcripts from the great yeshivas where they studied the Mishnah. And the Mishnah and the Gemara together is the Talmud. Now, although pretty much all the halachas, all the laws discussed throughout the Talmud, but as it was, not written to be a law book, was written it's the recorded lessons, the Shurim. Just think about our lessons. What happens is we might be studying something about Shabbos, and from that we mention a side point, or someone asks a question. From that, someone asks a question, and before you know it, we're discussing Shabbos, but we started discussing the laws of medications, or all kinds of things. And so that's what happened in the Talmud. We ended up having, as they were lessons, and people would bring proofs from other places in the Talmud, or questions or answers. You could end up, if you wanted to know every law, you would have to know the entire Talmud. So although the majority of laws of Shabbos, for example, are in the tractate of Shabbos, let's say 80%, but the other 20% could be anywhere in the Talmud. And for a period of time, that worked. Again, Jews got spread out, starts to be spread more around the world, less peace of mind, having time to study. And Aramaic, which was the language of the Talmud, became a second or third language. So now that was in danger of being lost. And so certain great codifiers, that's, the Rambam probably being the most famous and the groundbreaking, so codified everything. So he made laws of Shabbos, and not only made laws of Shabbos, he broke that down, laws of making Kiddush. And he took from all throughout the Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud, the Yerushalmi, the Israeli Talmud, and
Rabbi, can you just unmute me just mute me? Because...
Okay. Make my noise, okay. And
I think Susan has her hand up.
Sorry, Susan.
I meant all of us, just so that, because there's some background noise of children knocking. That's all. I'm sorry.
All right. Okay. So I'll mute everyone, and then we'll unmute Susan to ask a question. Yes.
Yes. I'm a little confused. Did you say that we lost part of our ability to process information?
Correct.
And how did that happen?
It was one of the 10 changes of the world when the first Beis Mikdash was destroyed.
Okay.
Yeah. So then what ended up happening there were other works of codification, and eventually the Beis Yosef put together what we call today the Shulchan Aruch, the large Shulchan Aruch, and the Ramah, a contemporary. They never met. Beis Yosef lived in Israel. Ramah lived in Poland. The Ramah had been working on a similar work, but the Beis Yosef came out first. And what he ended up doing, he changed his work into glosses onto the Shulchan Aruch if he disagreed, or if the Ashkenazic custom differed from the Sephardic custom. And that was the Shulchan Aruch. And then there were commentaries written on the Shulchan Aruch, etc., etc. So but the Shulchan Aruch was, together with the glosses, the Ramah became universally accepted as this is how a Jew, this is the guide for the legal guide for Jews, how to behave, what we need to do. So that really was cemented 1500s already, late 1500s. So Rabbi Shlomo Ganzfried, who wrote the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, the abridged, was born in the early 1800s. He lived till the late 1800s, so pretty much spanned that century. So interesting, he was born in, the world was different then. So he was born in the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, right, in Ungvar, and but some of the places he lived, which was still Hungary in those days, is Ukraine today. Just as a side point, right? There was anyway. He became an orphan as a young child. I think about 8, something like that, 8 years old. Yeah, became an orphan. The rabbi of the city raised him, and he was like a child prodigy. He was this genius. So besides that, he ended up, this rabbi who raised him, when he moved away, Rabbi Ganzfried followed him, but eventually came back to Ungvar where he was raised. He started off as a judge in the court, in the Jewish court, then, but he ended up becoming the rabbi of this large city, the head of the yeshiva, etc. But what happened was, at that time, the neolog started to infiltrate. Now, I guess essentially the Hungarian reform. Although every Jew is beloved and every Jew is our friend, but the ideologies of the movements, we could say, was the enemy of Judaism. So, we have to differentiate between a person and the ideology, right? You can still love a person and disagree with everything they stand for, in many ways. But, today, most of the people involved in reform various things is just lack of knowledge. It's not really an understanding of how it is. But in those days, it was people who wanted to take the spirituality out of Judaism. You want to take the God out of Judaism. Essentially, we were to be Germans or Hungarians or Americans of the Jewish persuasion. All right, that was what happened. And at that time, so Rabbi Shlomo Ganzfried, he felt that for your average person in the street, a tool they needed to be committed to Jews, so not for the scholars, but for the regular person, they needed a smaller code of Jewish law. They need something more user-friendly, without not a scholarly work with commentaries on the side and the bottom. They needed something the average person can look something up and just have a basic background. Obviously, there'll be a certain level where you need to go ask a scholar a question, but in order to be able to get a basic background, he felt that was missing. And so that's what caused him to write the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, this book that we're studying, the abridged code of Jewish law, trying to just make it a a simple, without multiple opinions, pretty much straightforward, user-friendly guide on how a Jew should live their life. That was his goal. And, it came out, I don't know, I think 1850s, 1860s, and it's pretty much withstood the test of time. I mean, it's still the basic text today. I mean, translate more languages you can think of. Just actually saw over here. First published 1864. Just as a side point, it wasn't the only book that he wrote. Probably the next most famous is Keses HaSefer. This is the main textbook to be a scribe. So today, you're not going to be pretty much no one's going to accept you. No one's going to give you ordination as a scribe without studying that sefer. So Baruch Hashem, I got tested on that. I never did the practical side of being a scribe. I don't have the hands for it, but the theoretical, Baruch Hashem. He also wrote several books on his Talmudic glosses, because he taught in yeshiva, so his classes, Pnei Shlomo and Shem, Pnei Shlomo and Shem Shlomo. He wrote. He also wrote another book called Torah Zebach. That's a guidebook to be a shoichet, the laws of Beshchita. He wrote Sefer Poroin, Aprion, and this is on the Pasha. Every week's Pasha except last week's. I don't know, maybe it was summer vacations when he took his break. He didn't give a sermon that week. I don't know. But every week. Lechem V'Simla is another very famous one on family purity. So those who study the commentaries, various things. Ole Shem. And this is an interesting book on the spellings of names for Gittin, for Jewish divorces. Right, so it's a complicated matter because for divorce to be valid, all the names have to be there. So it's the name of the place, the name of the person,
the cities.
The cities.
That's a big issue.
Place. Yeah, the nicknames, abbreviated names, so that you could have someone. The equivalent in English, you might have someone called Robert, Rob, Bob, Bobby. He's called all of them. So all of these things have to go in, and So he wrote a really interesting, again, a seminal work on that. So essentially, his life's writings were to fill the breaches. It was the needs of the time. Not the same scale, but very similar to the Rambam in that respect. The Rambam didn't write for the sake of writing. He saw that there were needs in the Jewish world at the time, and he wrote to fulfill those needs. And so anyway, today is his Yahrzeit. His memory should be a blessing. I'm sure. One of the things is on a person's Yahrzeit, person gets judged all over again. So you can ask, what do they get judged on, right? In the next world, you can't do Torah, you can't study, you can't do mitzvahs. I mean, you could perhaps study Torah at a certain level, but it's not starting with the challenge of this world. The challenges of this world. So what accomplishments can they have that they get rejudged on? So it's really the influence left on the world. I mean, if we look at ourselves, for example, I probably shared before, about 100, they found a census from a Roman census from approximately 100 years for the destruction of the second Beis Mikdash, second temple. And in the Roman Empire, there was approximately 13 million Jews in the world at the time. And if you look today, and I guess you could also say there's approximately 13 million Jews. Some will say 17, 18, some will say less, whatever it is. But you see, the number didn't change too much. We know from other sources that at the same time there was approximately 1 million Chinese in the world. And today there's approximately, I don't know, what is it? A billion? I'm not sure.
Almost 2.
Almost 2 billion Chinese.
I think so. Between them and Indians,
yeah, okay,
they're competing.
So the Indians, I'm not sure if they found any records, but they found records. So why did the number change? I mean, we're still the same, and there's so many more. Okay, persecution is a factor, but unfortunately, there's a very high dropout rate. Very high. They take the easier path.
Say, wait a minute. What do you mean a dropout rate? What do you mean?
Well, we see assimilation, intermarriage, and then in a generation or two, they're not Jews anymore.
Oh.
You know, it's an interesting thing. I mean, since we're mentioning it, we have a few times in the Torah where it says Hashem loves the descendants of those who keep the mitzvahs for 1,000 generations. But if they don't keep the mitzvahs and the next generation also doesn't, he's upset with them, you know, maybe even translators hates them for 3 or 4 generations. So the obvious question is, why the discrepancy? 1,000 generations, 3 or 4 generations. So, you know, you could say that for reward we give for even more, but it's very practical, because when you have people who keep Torah mitzvahs, then what you find is, even if they keep every generation, then 1,000 generations are still Jews. If you have people who stop keeping kosher and Shabbos and various things, and then the next generation also, and the next generation, what you find is that 4 generations is pretty much the limit of them still being Jews, unfortunately. Or even being aware, even if they happen to be a daughter of a daughter of a daughter of a daughter, even having awareness that they're Jewish. And by the time you get to that 5th generation, there's pretty much that's it. So so the fact that any of us are Jews today means that at least someone, and probably many someones in the past, had tremendous self-sacrifice. They gave up certain things. They risked. They maybe had to leave everything behind and move to another place in the world. The fact that any of us are Jews today is because some people somewhere back did tremendous things. Regular people did incredible things. Therefore, they have a share in every mitzvah that we have. Everything we do, we're starting today, they get a share. So on a person's Yahrzeit, it's sort of, I don't want to call it pyramid marketing, God forbid, but it's that sort of concept. Every generation that helped keep the next generation Jewish and involved and connected to Hashem, they have a share in everything that happens after that. So I said today's Shlomo Ganzfried's Yahrzeit, I wouldn't even be able to estimate how many Jews have gained from his work. You know, you would have to say tens of millions over the years. And all of those people. So he has a share. Every time we're not doing laws of Shabbos anymore, but we did the laws of Shabbos, you know, those who joined did the whole laws of Shabbos. So hopefully the Shabbos observance is enhanced and upgraded now that they're more aware and they know more things. So every year and that's just we're just one group of people learning. There's people all over the world who study his work. So every year on his Yahrzeit, he's reassessed and gets, so to speak, the pyramid marketing profits, and he goes up a level. Like anyone else, on the powerful day for him. And the way it works is that, when you pull a rope, so you pull one end up, the other end gets pulled as well. So the fact that we're connected because we're studying his work, so we get pulled up a little bit as well. And so on for anyone else's works that we study. So anyway, that's Shlomo Ganzfried.
Rabbi.
Very yes.
Wait, today was Rabbi Ganzfried, Jim?
I want to just.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Isaac. Go ahead. Finish what you were saying.
Yeah. No, I was just going to ask. Today, you said it's Rabbi Ganzfried's Yahrzeit.
Yeah, today's his Yahrzeit. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry.
I just want to backtrack a little bit about the Shulchan Aruch and the Ben Ish Chai. What are the differences between the two?
Okay, so Ben Ish Chai lived much later, lived in the 1800s as well. And what Ben Ish Chai didn't write a Shulchan Aruch, didn't write a. What the Ben Ish Chai did is he gave shiurim on the pasha, halachic shiurim on the pasha. So in the Sefer Ben Ish Chai there's 2 years worth, and so on that pasha he discusses the halachas that are based on something or connected something in the pasha. So let's say, for an example, next week's pasha we have the Shema, so it discusses various halachas of the Shema. So I'm presuming it was originally a shir, and then he made a sefer. Maybe he wrote it initially as a sefer, but just seems from the style.
Rabbi,
originally was a shir, and it looks like it ran for 2 years, or whatever it was.
Rabbi, you keep freezing, and then the audio goes crazy a little bit.
Okay, I'm sorry. I do see that every now and then it came up. My internet's not stable. I don't know. I'm not the technician, so I probably can't do much about it. But do let me know, so I'll repeat what I said. So I said, it seems I wasn't there, but it seems to me that originally it was a shir, it was a class that he gave, and then wrote it down. But it could be he wrote it initially. And also the way that it goes through, you got 2 years in the book. It just seems like it was a shir. So in that, he will sometimes say something that's novel, not only give over the laws, the basic laws, but also something that's novel. So we might quote a halacha in the name of the Ben Ish Chai, but it was never written. But it's a book on the pasha, going through halacha, but essentially on the pasha. It's not like you can look up the laws of Kiddush like you can in Shulchan Aruch. So much that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Had a student was teaching high school in when did I have him? 94. So for him and some of his friends, I gave a Ben Ish Chai shir for a while. So got to. It wasn't a well-known sefer in Australia at the time. Very small Sephardic community.
Rabbi,
Okay. Yes. Yeah.
I thought Ben Ish Chai is very famous for gematria. He does a lot of gematria combinations.
Yeah, I know. It's so the Ben Ish Chai, the sefer Ben Ish Chai is there's gematrias, but it's a well-known source for halacha. But in the yeshiva world, he's probably best known for his lessons on the Talmud. I can never say it. Ben Hayodja, however you say it, something like that. But it's fascinating. Article also brings him a lot, tremendous amount in the commentary. You see, Ben Hayodja is brought a lot. I actually did not know till I saw in an article Gemara that actually was the Ben Ish Chai. Just Ben Hayodja. I didn't know who wrote the sefer. I never actually had one. You see it in that you sometimes get you're starting a track date, so you don't start buying 50 volumes on the track date you're starting. You buy like a thick volume, and it has all the commentaries on that track date, the popular ones. So you would be in there, and it'd be interesting things. But because it was not the actual book, so it didn't have the title page, so didn't really see what it was. But anyways, he was But he wrote many other svarim as well. He was a great tzaddik. It's just, I feel like half the class is gone. We didn't learn inside the Sefer, but just since you mentioned Ben Ish Chai, just an interesting Ben Ish Chai story. Just that one time he was traveling and he stayed with a fellow for Shabbos. This fellow was a simple Jew, very religious, but very not so educated. And it comes Friday night. Many people have the custom to bless their children every Friday night. And he's got two sons. He puts his hands on his two sons' heads. And he says the words, Eilu ve'eilu nisrafim ve'sadeshin. Right? This one and this one should be burnt in the burning area. Right? In the temple, a Beis Hamikdash, if you had something that became disqualified, there was a place they burnt it. And he was like shocked. That's how he puts his hands in his son's heads and says, well, what are you doing? He says, I'm blessing my sons. He says, what do you mean? So it ended up that this man, although he could read Hebrew, he didn't understand Hebrew. And in his shul, the chazan said these words in a fancy tune for whatever reason. And he just thought it was the most important part of davening. So that's how he used to bless his sons every Friday night. So he told him what the words mean. You're wishing to be burnt, God forbid. And he taught him the real blessing for what you meant to. There should be like Ephraim and Menashe, right? Anyway, that Motzei Shabbos, that's the night after he Shabbos completed and he continued his journey. Eliyahu Novi came to him, Elijah the prophet. He says, Hashem's very upset with you. He says, what? He says, Hashem had such a pleasure from this man's sincerity, and you spoiled it. So anyway, it's an interesting, how many of us at our peak would like to meet Elijah the prophet? The Ben Ish Chai was someone who, when he made a mistake, even Elijah the prophet came to him. It was like, all right, whatever it is.